I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was awoken by a loud thump that came from somewhere in the house. My 8-year-old brain didn't process that right away though. Instead, I lay there, eyes closed, still hanging on to whatever dream I had just been having. After some amount of time, another banging noise echoed through the house. This time, I was awake enough to comprehend that I'd heard it. I remember it startling me and quickly opening my eyes. After a moment, I had put together that it wasn't morning yet. It was still dark in my room. I glanced down at the green numbers glowing on the windshield of my race car alarm clock. I don't remember exactly what time I saw. Maybe 1 or 2 a.m. Sometime in the middle of the night for sure. At first, I probably figured it was my mom, waking up to use the bathroom. Or maybe my older brother Mikey downstairs, raiding the kitchen for a midnight snack. He would often sneak out at night and come home really late. I'd caught him before. He'd woken me up that time too, loudly trying to creep back to his room. I don't think I really understood at that age just how much of a troublemaker he was. Anyway, it wasn't long before I began to lose the battle of trying to stay awake while pondering where the noise had come from. I was just on the verge of falling back asleep when I remembered something. It was Christmas Eve night. Well, technically, really early Christmas morning. I jolted up in bed, eyes wide open now. My excitement was attributed to the thought that Santa might have already been to our house. The thought that I could sneak down to get a quick preview of the array of presents awaiting our morning arrival. But then, an entirely different thought crossed my mind. What if the noise I heard was Santa himself, downstairs in my house right now, leaving our presents under the tree? I can finally rub it in Mikey's face that Santa really is real. My next move wasn't a hard one to figure out. I had a plan. I would tiptoe the whole way, careful not to make even the slightest of sounds. And just a peek, no more, no less. A tiny glance to confirm my suspicion. Then straight back up to my bed in the same silent fashion. After all, there was no way I was passing up on the opportunity. It may be the only chance I ever get to catch Santa in the act. I gently slid the covers off and slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet ever so softly planting into the carpet. I stayed there for a moment to let my eyes adjust to the darkness of the room. I could still hear the faintest sound of commotion coming from what seemed like downstairs. I crouched down and started on the path from my bed to the door in army man fashion, like I'd seen in the movies. The squeaky floor spots were the most dangerous landmines at that moment. When I finally reached my door, I grabbed the handle and slowly twisted. Please don't make noise. Please don't make noise. Success. Handle fully turned. I pulled the door open as slowly as I possibly could. Once I had it open just enough to fit my head through, I peeked around the corner of the doorframe. I paused to listen. I could still hear something, and determined that it was definitely coming from down the steps, somewhere. I couldn't quite tell what it was though. Just sounded like stuff moving around. I peeked my head around the corner further, and saw that my mom's door was closed, likely still sleeping. It wasn't her, and she hadn't heard it. I guided my door open a little more, gripping the edge hard. It was only a short few steps to the top of the stairs, and there were no squeaky floorboards there, so that part would be easy. I wouldn't be able to see the corner of the living room where our Christmas tree and fireplace was, until I reached the bottom of the stairs and rounded the corner. That would be harder. There were quite a few noisy steps, but I was sure I knew where they all were. I remember making it out of my room and into the hallway, then deciding that sneaking on all fours was somehow my best and quietest option to get to the top of the stairs. Piece of cake. I stopped to listen for any noises again. After a few seconds, I heard some sort of movement once again. But this time, there was something else with it. A ringing sound. A jingling bell, maybe? Yes, I knew it. I thought to myself, it's Santa. Excitedly, I quickly and carefully stepped down to the first step, then the next, and the next, until I finally reached the bottom. I had finally made it, and I was frozen, more scared than I'd ever been in my life. If I was caught, would I ever get presents again? Would Santa lose his magic? If you'd asked my brother Mikey, he would have told you that Santa never existed in the first place. He wouldn't even help me bake cookies for Santa that year. Our mom, being an only parent, often worked crazy hours and would either be working late into the night or sleeping all evening to go in early the next morning. So she'd tell Mikey to be a good brother and help me make the cookies and put out milk for Santa. He'd huff and puff about it and then eventually agree. But that Christmas Eve night, he didn't follow through. I remember it being the first time he just flat out refused to help me make them after my mom had gone to bed. It even ended with him yelling at me to go away and to grow up. I ran up to my room and straight to my bed, bawling my eyes out. I think that's how I eventually fell asleep. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, I waited and listened. I still heard some noises periodically. It seemed like, so far, I had gone unnoticed, and I was so proud of that. Focusing in on the noises, they sounded a bit different now that I was closer. I could hear more detail in the sounds. There were definitely a lot of shuffling sounds happening, but also now a hint of wet? I wouldn't have known how to explain it at the time. I remember thinking that it sounded like our family's golden retriever chowing down at her food bowl. Is that what this noise was all along? I felt a wave of disappointment from that. But still, I wanted to push on. The way our house was laid out, there were two ways to get to the living room. One hallway straight ahead, directly to it. Another to the left of that led to the kitchen, which itself had an entrance to the other side of the living room. I chose to bypass the kitchen and go straight ahead. When I got to the end of the hallway, I cautiously peered my head around the corner. Immediately, I realized that this wasn't the best view. I could barely see the Christmas tree behind our couch that was blocking the way. But I stared and listened, still as a statue. That's when I saw it. Something red. Something big and red, barely visible above the couch, and moving behind the Christmas tree. It didn't take me long to make out what it was. Santa's hat. It had to be. I stayed there for a while watching, but it would only seldomly pop up into my view. It was so hard to make out if it really was what I thought it was. I decided that I could get a much better view going through the kitchen, where the couch would be out of the way and the other side of the tree would be in direct line of sight. As I started backwards and around the hallway corner, I remember wishing I would have grabbed my Polaroid camera from my dresser in my room. Mikey would never believe me when I told him what I was about to see. I finally made it to the kitchen after what felt like forever, quietly prowling through the hallways. I was ducked behind the far row of counters that backed up to the living room. The sounds were louder than ever, still ongoing. Such a strange sound, though. Was Santa shoveling handfuls of spaghetti into our stockings? Surely not, but that's what I remember it sounding like. One of the few ridiculous theories I had. All I had to do was slowly and quietly stand up from my crouching position now. Just enough to peer over the top of the counter and complete the task that possibly no other kid in history had managed to achieve. My little heart was jumping out of my chest. When I finally managed to balance on shaky legs, I pushed myself upwards, ever so slowly, hand gripping the counter's edge. The scene finally came into view. I slowly processed it over the course of a few seconds. It is. It's him. There he was, the fat man in the red suit, standing right in my living room. He was much bigger than I'd imagined. His massive, bushy white beard, big, shiny black boots. I couldn't clearly see his face. But that was the first few seconds. The next few seconds was my brain finally putting together what I was seeing. He wasn't directly facing me. That means he didn't see me. And that was good. He was kneeling down, doing something. Reaching into his big red bag that was sprawled out across the floor. Searching for presents. No, that wasn't it. It wasn't his bag. It wasn't cloth at all. But it was red. Lots of red. After a few more seconds, the entire scene started to come together for me. The sounds synced up with the picture just then. My eyes were focused in, and the little cogs were turning. It was liquidy. Red liquid. Oozing out of and around a pile of something on the ground, right in front of a hunched-over Santa. His big face was in it. He was eating it? Is that blood? I remember thinking it was an animal, and wondering why Santa would be doing such a thing to an innocent creature. My mood shifted completely as my body froze and my hair stood on end. I watched in horror. His head slowly rose up from the pile of flesh at one point, slowly towards my direction. He didn't turn his head far enough, though, to be able to spot me. But nonetheless, I quickly ducked down further, without breaking my line of sight. He just sat there, chewing slowly, but aggressively. I could see more of his face now. He had a huge, rosy red face, with perfect, massive teeth sitting perfectly in his oversized mouth. I thought that nothing about him looked particularly frightening, other than his sheer size. That alone sent chills running through me. That and the ridiculous amount of blood dripping from his mouth, covering his beard, his hands, and everything else. It was everywhere. The floor, the walls, the fireplace, the tree. The tree. As I noticed the red dripping from the bottom branches of the tree, I noticed something else there too. Beneath it, I saw shoes. 2 red shoes lay there, bottoms facing me, right underneath our tree. And there weren't just shoes. There were pants attached to them, but not just clothes. The final pieces of the picture that had been in front of me the whole time revealed itself. It wasn't some innocent animal laying there. It was a person. Santa was feasting on the midsection of a human body. In hindsight, it was organs that were strewn about all around the area, following the shoes up to the legs and past the mangled body. My eyes finally fixated on the head. A face that was pointing right in my direction. The face had blood splatters everywhere, but the lifeless eyes were open, seeming to stare right at me. This was a lot to process in a very short time, and I felt myself shaking profusely. I was going to puke or pass out. Something. The worst part is, I knew the face. That was my brother's face. Santa was eating Mikey. I remember being so out of it after that I lost all reasoning and let out some sort of panicked noise from my mouth. The last thing I saw before I stood up and took off out of the kitchen was Santa's giant eyes looking dead at me. Things get a little foggy for me after that. I guess I was in shock or something. I remember busting through my mom's door and screaming at her to wake up. I don't know what I said, if anything comprehensible at all. My mom was confused, scared, and angry at me, all in a short time. Eventually, she ran downstairs, me hiding behind her the whole time. I have a very vague memory of getting down there with her and seeing nothing at all. No gigantic Santa in sight, not a single drop of blood anywhere, and no lifeless Mikey. After that, the next few weeks, or months, maybe years, are all blurred together in my memory. In fact, the entire thing feels like not much more than a distant nightmare I once had. That's probably what I would chalk it all up to, if it weren't for the fact that my brother really was missing. Looking back now, I know that it was a big thing. So much of our community, local police, even the FBI, all looking for him nonstop. It's been 20 years since that night, and still to this day, nobody knows where he is. To be honest, I don't think about my brother much anymore. Mainly because the memory of him was now exclusively associated with that night, obviously. His blood-splattered face, looking at me. But I'm the only one who knows where he really is. And this morning, something confirmed that for me. I woke up this morning in my apartment. I live here alone, just me. So when I rolled out of bed and walked into my tiny living room, I was surprised to see a single neatly wrapped present under my little crappy tree. Immediately, the memories came rushing back to me. No. I worked up the courage to pick up the present. No label or anything else. Just a little gift wrapped in all red wrapping paper, with a sparkling white bow on top. I opened it. Inside was a little white box. Inside that white box was a smaller box. A tiny red velvet-covered box. It was a ring box, like you see people propose with. When I opened it up, there was indeed a small silver ring inside. I grabbed it with my fingers and brought it closer to me to get a better look at it. It had a dragon design on the side that wrapped all the way around. After looking for a moment, it clicked. This was Mikey's ring, his favorite ring when we were little. I remember being jealous of it because I thought it looked so cool. I'd ask him to borrow it often, He'd always say no and yell at me to quit asking. My fingers were trembling as I stood there, studying the ring. This wasn't happening. My trauma and the resulting anxiety from that night had been buried deep somewhere. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it all bubbling back to the surface. Not knowing what to do, I quickly knelt down to the floor to get the stupid ring back in the box. That's when I noticed something else. A folded piece of paper that had been in the white box underneath the ring box. I hesitated before slowly reaching down to grab it. When I finally brought myself to unfold the paper, I saw that it was a short note, written on a thick, Christmas-themed piece of paper. This is what it read.
Dear Sean, I am ever so sorry that it took this long. I meant to send this to you ages ago. I found it laying around the shop and figured you might want it. You always did, didn't you? By the way, I am truly sorry about your brother Mikey. But to be fair, for centuries, I've worked tirelessly to spread word around the world that kids need to behave. Your brother just never could get that part right. Merry Christmas, Sean. Signed, Santa. P.S. Never forget to leave the milk and cookies.